The non-belief is incoherent omnibus. Number 22. The argument from doxastic involuntarism. Premise 1. Some atheists express non-resistant atheism. Premise 2. Non-resistant atheism implies a lack of voluntary control over belief, defeating doxastic voluntarism. Premise 3. If there is no voluntary control over belief, then a suspension of belief is not possible. Suspension of judgment is merely an admission that one does not know the truth of the proposition, which speaks to agnosticism. Conclusion. Therefore, one may inevitably believe one of a pair of binary propositions, even if such belief is unwarranted or undesired due to the inherent difficulty in achieving, much less sustaining, the perfect equilibrium necessary to find neither proposition any more likely, read believe, than the other.
Let's look at the first premise. Some atheists express non-resistant atheism. This I accept as true. Moving on, premise 2. Non-resistant atheism implies a lack of voluntary control over belief, thereby defeating doxastic voluntarism. This I find flawed. First, it falsely assumes that non-resistant atheism implies a lack of voluntary control over belief, but this doesn't follow. Non-resistant atheism simply describes a person who lacks belief in God without willfully rejecting it. It doesn't say anything about the nature of belief formation itself. This doesn't decide the debate in either direction. Second, even if non-resistant atheists lack direct voluntary control, this doesn't defeat doxastic voluntarism in any meaningful sense. Voluntarism, depending on its formulation, may allow for indirect control over belief through evidence-seeking, rational reflection, or influence over one's epistemic environment. That belief isn't formed by sheer willpower doesn't undermine voluntarism, it simply reflects how belief generally works for all people. Premise 2. Smuggles in an unsupported claim about what non-resistant atheism entails and draws an unjustified conclusion about doxastic voluntarism. The author would need to provide an argument for the inference. Premise 3. If there is no voluntary control over belief, then a suspension of belief is not possible. A lack of control over belief simply means that beliefs form passively, in response to evidence or reasoning, not through conscious choice. A suspension of belief would be passively lacking belief in a proposition due to insufficient evidence. This does not require voluntary effort. A suspension of judgment is somewhat related but unnecessary to suspend belief. It is the act of withholding any decision about the truth or falsehood of a proposition, recognizing uncertainty. In short, belief is about holding a position, while judgment is about deciding whether to hold to that position. If the entailment that the author wishes to put forth is that without voluntary control over belief that uncertainty about the truth of a proposition compels one into agnosticism, they are mistaken. Since a suspension of belief is a passive state that naturally arises due to lack of evidence or reasoning, there is no need to suspend judgment due to uncertainty. The proposition just doesn't rise to a point of consideration. The conclusion is a bit of mess. The conclusion is problematic because it introduces another premise that isn't supported in the argument. That there is inherent difficulty in achieving perfect equilibrium necessary to either suspend judgment or belief in a proposition. In reality, people can and do maintain a state of suspended belief due to lack of information. Suppose we consider the proposition that a teapot were floating in space between Jupiter and Mars. I lack a belief in the proposition because I haven't encountered compelling evidence to adopt a position. I have no need to suspend judgment on the proposition because I feel no pressure to adopt belief. Lacking this belief or certainty doesn't cause any cognitive strain. The argument essentially claims non-resistant atheism defeats voluntarism. Without voluntarism, suspension of belief is impossible. Therefore, one must adopt a belief. But the argument fails on all counts. Non-resistant atheism doesn't imply lack of control over belief. Lack of control doesn't preclude suspension of belief. No justification was given for why disbelief isn't an option. The argument is unsupported and can be soundly rejected.